For those of you who don't know me, my name is Madeleine Burke, and I'm here with my beautiful daughter Amy and her daughter Athena to tell our story. Since everyone's out of the closet these days, I think it's high time that we come out of the closet and talk about mental health and suicide, which has become, as you just saw, a national epidemic. I want to talk to you a little bit about my husband Eddie, whose life was tragically cut short by suicide on September 9th of 2018. Eddie and I grew up in New York, and he was my high school crush. He was a moody guy, had these electric blue eyes, played guitar in a rock band, and he quit the track team because he refused to cut his hair. So he's just the kind of guy that I was attracted to. So on the first day of school, when I was in the 10th grade and he was a senior, he showed up in our French class, and I thought, this is my chance to put a move on this guy. However, being the rebel that he was, he cut class every day, so that plan was not going to happen. It should come as no surprise to anyone that Eddie would later become a teacher and mentor to students like himself. Eventually, we would meet on the night of my high school graduation. He was in college studying English, and the following year, he quit school and moved to Berkeley, California with his band, become rich and famous, and become a rock star. I was crushed. We kept in touch by letter. It was 1975. There were no cell phones, no texts, okay? And I have found many of those letters that apparently he saved, which I thought was very sweet. A few months later, I would join him in California, and we had some wild times. Anybody wants to know about them, I'll be happy to share the stories. When his band did not become rich and famous, and drugs took the lives of several of our friends, we returned to New York City and eventually got married. Eddie returned to school, and this time he decided to get a degree in accounting, business, and economics. Why he decided to study accounting after his stint as a rock star is anyone's guess. However, I thought to myself, well, if I have a CPA as a husband, my life is going to be on easy street. Amy was an infant at the time. So he got a job at Merrill Lynch, and that lasted for about a month. One day he came home, his tie was down, he was in a suit that we couldn't afford to buy, and he said, this is not for me. So he decided to drive a cab at night in New York City for 2 years to support us. And needless to say, that really tested our marriage. At that point, I decided to return to school to become a nurse, and Amy was 18 months old. She was in a Montessori daycare, and Eddie became intrigued by the Montessori method of teaching. And so he decided, again, to go back to school. He was a professional student. And this time he went to Malcolm X Martin Luther King College in Harlem, which I'm sure he was the only white person in the class, and he earned a degree in education. Teaching would eventually land us in Miami when our second child, Patrick, was 2 years old. He taught science in Hialeah for 30 years. And I would often try to get him to move, closer to our home in Kendall, thinking it would be easier on him. But he had a love for those kids in Hialeah because I think they reminded him so much of the kids that we grew up with. He got very disappointed when they gave him an honors class. He would always say, those kids will be fine. The problem kids were always sent to Burke's class, and that's how he liked it. Ed's Montessori training led him to be very creative in the classroom, and he developed some very unusual teaching techniques. Perhaps the most famous among his students was that, cell phones aren't allowed in the classroom, so he would take them, duct tape the cell phone, and throw them out the window to demonstrate the law of gravity. I was later told by some of his students that it was an honor for them to have their cell phones duct taped by Burke. And I used to tell him, you are going to get fired for your classroom antics. And he would look at me incredulously and say, they're science experiments. The funny thing was that the kids really learned. But Eddie's true gift was in counseling students who were troubled. He knew all of his students by name, and often his classes would reach 40 or more students. At one point he had 60 students in one class, and he knew all the kids by name. He used to eat lunch in his classroom so that the kids could come in and out and talk to them about their problems. Ironically, he would come home and tell me how he intensely talked to students about suicide. He became a mentor to many students, but one in particular that stands out, and some of you know the story, Dario Brito, was one of those troubled students. One Saturday, Dario called in tears, telling me he was kicked out of his house. He was 18 years old at the time. So I invited him to move in. What mom wouldn't do that? And he stayed with us for a year. This kid was undisciplined, sloppy, didn't know how to sit down to a family dinner, and I had to teach him how to make a bed. Because you know, as a nurse, you gotta know how to make a bed. So, Dario was a kid with 8 brothers and sisters, and each by a different dad. He was late to school every day, and Ed realized that nobody in his house got up to go to work, so he bought him an alarm clock. Eddie's mentoring and example as a husband and father would impact Dario, and today he's a successful businessman, still married to his high school sweetheart after 15 years, and a good dad to his 2 children. Eddie was a devoted husband, father, son, and grandfather, and fiercely protective of all of us, right? He adored his 3 granddaughters, and they adored him. He led the Bible club at school, which he renamed the Spiritual Discussion Club to be more inclusive. He led youth groups at church. He was a counselor to our pastor. He played guitar in the church band. Eddie always took time to listen to people's problems, and he saw the good in everyone, and he was loved by all who knew him. Don't get me wrong, this man was very difficult to live with, and he had an explosive temper, and his profanities and expletives are legendary in our family. Eddie became severely depressed in 2007, and the psychiatrist diagnosed him with OCD, depression, and anxiety. He was started on medications, and within a few months, he was much better. In fact, he was highly functional. He earned his master's degree in exceptionalities in 2009 and earned a PhD in 2016. He did well on his medication, and for the next 11 years would become the best of our 43 years together. So in the spring of 2018, he felt so good that he decided to go off his medications. I disagreed, but he weaned himself off of Lexapro anyway. But for those of you who are married, what husband listens to their wife? Okay? Patrick was married on July 21st of 2018, and that was the last time I remember him being happy. A few weeks later, he would spiral down into a deep depression. He went back to his psychiatrist and was put on his medications. He lost his passion for music. He was unable to concentrate on his lesson plans, and he didn't want to go out of the house. He couldn't sleep or eat. I thought it would just be a matter of time before the meds would kick in as they had before, and he would be back to the happy, productive man that I knew. Every day I would ask him if he felt better, and barely speaking, he would just shake his head no. At that point, I tried in vain to get him in to see a psychologist, even those that weren't on our insurance plan, and it was impossible. Everyone wanted to see him in a month. I said, I can't wait a month. I took time off from work to be with him, and I asked him repeatedly, are you having any thoughts of harming yourself? And he would say, no, I would never do that to you, and I would never do that to my family. And I believed him because Eddie never lied to me. And I was hesitant to seek help from my pastor or my friends because of the stigma. He didn't want anyone to know. He was a very proud person. This man who had been my rock, who I went to for answers, wasn't able to help me. I finally called my pastor, Todd, and I said to him, I feel like I'm betraying Eddie, but this is what we're going through. And Todd said, Maddie, you shouldn't have to be going through this alone. Todd came over, talked to Eddie, he prayed with us and prayed over our home. He called Wellspring, and we finally got in to see a counselor, but it was too late. I called the psychiatrist distraught. I left a voicemail telling him that Eddie was getting worse, and I never received a call back from the psychiatrist, but he did prescribe an additional medication. I tried everything in my power to help him, but I was truly at a loss. On that Sunday, September 9th of 2018, I was sitting in my living room searching online for a hospital to bring him to because I thought that that's what needed to happen. But when I saw my choices, I just couldn't bear to Baker Act him. I got him to agree to go on a bike ride thinking it would be good for him, and then we were going to visit his parents. And while I was in another room getting ready, and I thought he was taking a shower, he took his life with his own gun. Needless to say, the aftermath was surreal, and my house became a crime scene. I knew that I could never return to my home of 24 years, where we raised our kids and had many happy moments. We were the nucleus of our family, and all holidays and events were held at our home. My good friends graciously opened up their homes to me as I numbly went through the next few months. As an aside, she's not here today, but I had somebody that I call my Jewish mother, and she was just kind of telling me what to do every day. And then she said to me one day, you know, you should be listening to Joyce Meyer, the televangelist. I said, you're Jewish, why would you listen to Joyce Meyer? And she goes, trust me. So I did. I asked the Wellspring counselor that had seen Eddie if I could keep his appointment for myself, and I began EMDR therapy, which has been very, very good for me for my post-traumatic stress symptoms. This was truly a lifesaver, and I thank God for all the people at Wellspring and their support. I truly don't know where I would be without, if not for them. Needless to say, this past year has been very difficult for me and my family, and Eddie's absence at family gatherings has been palpable. The grief has been soul-crushing, and at times I've felt that even God has abandoned me. As I told my story to all who would listen, Uber drivers, waitresses, hotel employees, anybody that I saw, that I ran into, I'd say, let me tell you my story. And I was truly alarmed and stunned to find out how many people's lives have been touched by mental illness. And again, alarmed at how many resulted in suicide. And it became obvious to me that our community lacks resources for mental health. I have been slowly moving forward with the help of a lot of people in this room to figure out my new normal. It seems when you're going through this that everyone's gone back to their lives except for you. And it's easy to become stuck. Pastor Rick Warren lost his son to suicide 13 years ago, and I listened over and over to his YouTubes. A couple of things really have stuck with me. One is why. I keep asking myself, why? And he said, there is no why, and even if there were, it would not bring that person back. The other thing that he said is that one of the things that can happen is that you can let tragedy destroy you, define you, or develop you. And that has really stuck with me. So over the past few months, it has occurred to me that Eddie would want me to be happy. And I am indeed grateful for everyone and every resource that I have. Because of Eddie's love and mission to help teenagers at risk, I have decided to create a scholarship in his name so that his legacy would live on, and adolescents without the financial resources would be able to find counseling. And Wellspring has graciously allowed me to do this. I have finally understood the passage in the Bible that speaks of beauty from ashes. And I cling to my favorite Bible verse, which is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. I'm hoping that you will all join me in supporting Wellspring and my husband's scholarship fund to make this verse a reality for kids who need help but lack resources. Thank you all for coming out this morning, and thank you for allowing me to share my story with you.